Okay, so we're going to be covering chapter one, which is a culture, people, and history. It talks about the population of Texas, and I have pretty much set this one up in three parts. None of them is really very long, but it's easier to load if it's like less parts. So this is part one. See, part one. So what we're going to be talking about in this particular part is that we're going to be giving you some definitions and analyzing some information. And this is kind of an interesting part of this chapter because it tells you about a political culture or why people believe what they do, which leads to that last part, the ideologies, your ideologies. It gives you definitions about what politics is, what public policies are, what a conservative is in Texas, what a liberal is in Texas. So as I said, it's going to be pretty interesting, in my opinion, anyway. So let's talk first about what political culture is. And so you can say, or it is defined as the dominant political values and beliefs in the nation or state. So we're going to kind of be bringing it down to the state level, to the state of Texas. And so it's kind of based on this thing that political scientists call political socialization. I'm sure you probably never heard that term, but it's basically saying, why is it that you believe what you believe about politics and about the role of government? And you are being socialized in a lot of ways since you are very young, but you don't realize that you're being socialized by your parents. So there's basically a few institutions that play a more dominant role in socializing you on how you feel about politics. And so these particular institutions are your religion and how strongly you believe your religion and how strongly you live your religion, your community, however you define your community, and your family. And your family is probably, of these three institutions, your family is probably the most dominant force in the way that you think about government's role in everyday life. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. When you were little or you're growing up or whatever, and so some families are very politically active and they talk a lot about politics. My family was like that. We were always talking about politics at home. I guess maybe that's why I went into political science, I guess. But anyway, so I mean, something could happen, and so a family may say, "Oh, I can't believe that happened. Why doesn't the government say something about it?" Well, or do something about it. Well, so that's saying it's already saying the government should take a role in solving the problem, and so that would be reflective more of liberal ideology, and we're going to be talking about these. Or the same thing may happen, and a family member may say, "Oh, the government needs to keep their nose out of people's business." Well, that's more reflective of conservative ideology. So we'll be talking about it more in those types of terms. Okay, we're going to be talking about the ideologies and what they represent or the characteristics of the ideologies in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about Texas. It's always been said that Texas is a very conservative state, that it's a ruby red Republican state. And so that has been true in the past, but the last election that we had, the last general election that we had, showed something different. I'm going to be showing you those numbers and going through a graphic to explain some of this information to you. So basically, there's a conservative ideology, and that's basically the Republican Party. And then there's the Democratic or the Texas liberals that are more like a still somewhat conservative, but it's more the Democratic Party. Now, I said Texas had always been considered to be a very red state, but some of the information that's been coming out tends to say no, we're starting to become more of a purple state. We're starting to become more of a swing state, as evidenced by some of the information or the data, the polling that's been coming out, as I said, from the last elections. For example, uh, according to the University of Texas poll, I think it was, let me see, total I have right here. Okay. There are 48% of Texans identify as Republicans, and 42% of Texans identify as Democrats. So there's not that much of a difference between the two. Now look at this poll right here, or look at the results of this poll right here. They're kind of hard to see. You might have to get back into the book to look at it, but this is basically what it's saying. The very first one, the top one, the one that has the one circle. Okay, this is where I'm pulling the information from. So it says, in Texas, based on the ideologies, the Republicans, those are the ones in the red. The Democrats are the ones in the blue. The independents are the ones in the gray, and the independents means they could vote either way. You might be independent more left-leaning or independent more right-leaning. And so a lot of people, you can say a lot of people may fall into this category, but this particular information tends to state that party still plays a difference here. Okay, so let me see. So when it comes to gender, males tend to vote Republican at a higher rate at 50%, since they identify as Republicans, whereas 38% of the males tend to identify as Democrats or they voted Democrat, whereas 11% are independents. For the women in the state of Texas, 45% voted Republican, 46% identified with Democrats, 9% with independents. Now, when it comes to race and ethnicity, I'm going to break it down by each of the categories, starting with the black vote. It's always been said that the blacks tend to vote as a voting bloc, and they vote for the Democratic candidates, and that holds true, and that's what this information or this data indicates. It says that for the black votes, 78% of the black population or demographic voted for Democrats, while 12% voted for Republicans and 10% for independents. When it comes to the Anglos, 59% identified as Republicans, 33% as Democrats, and 8% as independents. Asians, 35% Republicans, 50% as Democrats, and 15% as independents. Now, when it comes to the Latina vote, and this is the one that voted strongly for Trump, which helped him get elected in the last general election. But this is how it breaks down: 39% identified as Republicans or voted as Republicans, 49% as Democrats, and 12% as independents. Now, when it comes to the last one, the five little circles that you see right there, that's the generational voting. And so this one is kind of exciting to me because this is the first time that your generation, or most of your generation, the Gen Z, has voted. And so we're seeing how exactly have you voted. So this is what the poll for the state of Texas, or in the state of Texas, has kind of panned out. Okay, the Gen Z votes. Are you ready for this? 35% voted Republican, 54% as Democrats, and 11% as independents. Now, the millennials are a little bit older, and so of the millennials, 39% voted Republican. Now, 50%, I think it says, voted Democrat, and 11% as independents. Like, these are very small numbers. Okay, but what's interesting here is there starts to be a shift when it comes to Generation X, which is people in their like late 40s, probably the 50s. The baby boomers are in their 60s and 70s. The silent generation, these are like people that are much older. I would say like 80s plus. As you can see from the red, it's starting to make that shift as you become older, and has borne out for many studies that have been conducted. That as you get older, you tend to vote more as a conservative, more as a Republican. But anyways, I just thought this would be interesting to see how we look at this in the state of Texas. Okay, so then when it comes to Texas itself, we're going to kind of narrow it down. If you're a conservative in the state of Texas, or you say I'm Republican and I have very conservative values, what that usually means is that you believe in limited government. You don't want our politicians to be making a lot of laws that are going to be interfering in people's lives. And I mean, I have to tell you this at this point. When it comes to Texas, Texas tends to be more conservative than most other states in the nation. So even if you say that you're a liberal, you tend to be more conservative liberal. I know that's an oxymoron, but more conservative than the national liberals. Okay, so limited government, low taxes. We don't want to pay a lot of taxes. We would rather have less social services than pay higher taxes. And so, when we had the recession in 2008, Texas fared better than a lot of states because we didn't have a lot of services to have to cut because we never had a lot of services to start with in the first place. So we didn't fare that badly. But anyway, so conservatives tend to support traditional values, and traditional values are usually defined as, um, a traditional marriage, high levels of religion, that type of thing. But more so, it talks about marriages between a man and a woman. So those are the types of traditional values that conservatives tend to believe in. Okay, so when it comes to the ideologies within the conservative or a conservative ideology, I would say in Texas, what it says is that, we don't like for the government to be involved in our daily lives, but we really do not like government to be involved in business. If I had one phrase to talk about to tell you when it comes to conservative Republicans or conservative ideology in the state of Texas, well, actually, there's two. One of them is pro-business. Whatever laws are going to be out there, they should be to promote business. Whatever taxes are going to be out there, there should be out there so that we can promote business. Whatever tax breaks there are, it should be to promote business. The second one that I want to tell you is pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Okay, so the way that it figures into this particular slide is that conservative Texans are skeptical of state involvement in the economy. So pro-business, but it's saying, but it's pro-business to this point. It says you can set up your business anytime you want, and it's up to you to make your business a go or not a go. So pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, that's called free market capitalism. Either your business is going to make it or it's not going to make it. And this last one about pull yourselves up by your own bootstrap, well, that's called personal responsibility. And it's saying, you know what, if you're having issues in your life, what you need to do is that you need to go to your church, you need to go to your family, or whatever. Do not depend on government. That's public policy. We'll be talking about that in a second. Do not depend on government to give you a handout when you need it. If you need it, you go anyplace else except the government. And if you are of the more liberal persuasion in the state of Texas, those are conservatives. If you are more liberal, you're saying, well, you know what? Actually, we think that government can play a role to benefit the population. Because if you're a liberal, you say there are injustices out there, there are inequalities out there. And these inequalities stem from institutional and economic racism. They're forces beyond a person's control. So, and the way that this is playing out, they're saying not everybody is born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and you may not be familiar with that term, but not everybody is born with privilege. Some people are born into very socioeconomic, lower socioeconomic status, and so they may have a harder time trying to make it because they have their school systems may be not very adequate or deficient. They might not have good health care, so it's just on and on and on. Poverty is just like so pervasive. It affects like most parts of your life if you don't have the money to do anything. And so what they're saying is that sometimes these things are out of your control. And so if they are out of your control, then maybe government programs can be used to help you do better in life. So government should be the one that should be able to provide these programs, for people that are in these disadvantaged groups. Okay, we'll talk more about ideologies when I cover the part on ideologies in the political parties chapter. Okay, now we're going to talk about this term called partisanship because I'm going to be using the term partisanship and bipartisanship. So partisanship means you vote with your party. You say everything that I see, everything that I think, the people that I'm going to support is only going to be based on my party affiliation, whether I'm a Democrat or a Republican. You're going to vote along party lines. You're going to be supported. You're going to support the public opinions of the conservatives or the liberals within Texas itself. So you're partisan. Bipartisan means that you are willing to like cross the lines, that they say cross the aisle, to cross the aisle to say, well, maybe the Democrats have some good points, or maybe the Republicans have some points, but it's like you're trying to come in with a compromise. And believe it or not, that's the way it used to be back in the olden days. The way laws were made was through this thing called compromise and bipartisanship. That fell out of favor probably back in the 90s. I mean, it's been a while. It's been a while, and consequently, not much is getting done in the government. And when I talk about not much is getting done within the government, let's bring it down to Texas. And we're going to talk about this thing called public policy. And that's actually my main area. That's what I do. That's what I teach. But public policy is kind of a wide range of things, like what happens up to the point that something is so important that it needs to become a law, and then what happens to it afterwards. But for this particular course, we're going to talk about it just being in terms of the law that's passed. So it's being able to legislate or pass a law on some type of substantive issue that's going to be based on ideology and partisanship. And so the type of laws that I'm talking about may involve social services such as education, such as healthcare. So let me give you a few examples of these two because these are the ones where you would see it the most dramatically, the most starkly. You know, I said a minute ago that if you're poor, you may not have a lot of access to healthcare. And so if you are of the Democratic persuasion or the more liberal persuasion, you may say we need to have more universal health care coverage. And I don't like to use that term universal very much, but more broad scale coverage, such as the Obamacare or the ACA, such as expanded CHIPS programs, such as expanded Medicaid programs. So there's several out there. You know, Texas is dead last, guys, dead last when it comes to children's health insurance or insuring children. Dead last. I mean, we should not be proud of that. And then when it comes to education, the same thing. If you live in a poor school district, we were talking about this when I talked about the prologue. If you live in a poor school district, you may not get a very good education. They're trying to fix it. They're trying to make the school systems more equitable through this Robin Hood plan. So this is how it turns out. So there is a liberal way to look at it, and then there's a conservative way to look at it. When it comes to education, we have a very conservative legislature right now. They have cut school funding, the K through 12 funding, and cut K through 12 funding, where you have like larger class sizes, you have less extracurricular activities, you have less funding per pupil, and that's kind of the big one because a big chunk of it comes from property tax, and we'll talk about property tax, but not until the very end of the semester, or that's like the last lecture. But it's basically saying if wherever you live, you pay taxes, and even if you're a renter, you're going to pay taxes. It's included in your rent. That's why your kids can go to public school. But that only covers part of it. The other part is covered by the state and some by the federal government. And so, if the state is reducing what they're going to be giving to the school districts, which they did, and they have, and it's never been completely refunded to the point it was right before the last Great Recession that we had, the 2008 recession. And so, so what happens is that the school districts, even if you go to a good school district, you might be okay. And I know it's not fair in a lot of ways. And it's called capture. That's what they call it. I mean, Port Aransas, because they have these big fancy houses and they pay a lot of property taxes because they have big fancy houses. Well, they have a lot of extra money, if you want to call it that. They don't. Port Aransas School District does not consider it to be extra money. The state considers it to be extra money. They say you don't need that. We're going to take some of that money and give it to the poor school districts. Okay, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I don't think it's the best way to do it. They've tried to fix it in many different ways, but they try to fix it and it gets worse. They try to fix it and it gets worse. So no one's been able to come up with a good solution to that. But all I'm saying is this: when it comes to making laws, nothing is simple. There's too many complicated and complex domino effects that if you do this, well, these other people are going to get hurt. If you do these, what about these other people are going to get hurt? So it just kind of depends. Uh, we do not have a national level abortion law. We have Roe versus Wade, but the states have taken it upon themselves to pass different laws that are going to be limiting the types of abortions or abortions in general. Like, for example, because we have this very conservative legislature, we talked about the Tea Party, the Freedom Caucus, and all that. So what they've done within the last, I would say, maybe 6 years or so, and the most significant one, of the state pieces of state legislature that they enacted was that they said these abortion clinics like Planned Parenthood, they cannot do it. You have to do it within some kind of an ambulatory setting, which is kind of like a hospital. Otherwise, you can't do it. So it closed down a lot of the centers that were available. within the state of Texas, and there's only few, and I really don't know how many, but there's very few that are left. Okay, Planned Parenthood said you can't just shut us down because we don't just do abortions. I mean, we also provide for, for women of, lesser means, to have their mammograms or whatever, their birth control and all this kind of stuff. So you can't just like not fund this because we are offering health services to the indigent population. So they've been kind of like trying to negotiate and give them some funding, but not for abortions, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see how that turns out. Okay, when it comes to same-sex marriages, I kind of mentioned this in the last lecture, is that the conservative legislature that we have pushed through that particular one about the amendment that marriage is between a man and a woman. Well, when the Supreme Court came out and they said no, based on the equity clause, and we'll talk about the equity clause when I talk about federalism in the next lecture, uh, it's saying it states it doesn't matter what you pass. There is a Supreme Court ruling, and that Supreme Court ruling reigns supreme. So all the states have to do it. Your law is sorry guys. Okay, that your law is null and void.